All right. We're live. And before we start, let's go to YouTube and grab the link. Yes. I'm hearing myself. Okay. Is everyone okay there?
Yeah, my brother is like shouting.
You need me to send help
It's
to your
okay.
brother?
It's okay.
Tell him that he's now live. He's been recorded.
Yeah, I'm back.
No worries. Okay, so I'm sharing links. Okay, so shared the information. Okay. I just shared the link, so if anyone else wants to join, they can join us here on StreamYard, or they can watch us on YouTube. And I'm telling Lucas, so please, if he can share this on social media, because otherwise it will take us forever to start. Uh, cool. All right. Okay. All right. Cool. So in the meantime, in case someone is already watching and waiting, we can see if someone is watching. We have someone on YouTube watching. Say hi. Whoever you
Hi.
are, say hi. No, no, we don't have anyone on YouTube anymore. Damn. We lost this person. So we don't have anyone watching yet. Um, that is that is cool. That is relaxing, right? Like we can
Yeah.
just have a chat here. It's been recorded, so don't forget. It's Kuda. So Kuda is on YouTube, but he suddenly disappeared. So hey, Kuda, man, if you
Hi.
want to join the live stream, you can join us. Feel free. I left the um, I left the link on the Slack channel. Not sharing on social media for reasons. We got a lot of trolls in the past joining just to show us their beautiful parts, and that's not that is not something that we want to see again. So yeah. So for those watching the recording and whoever wants to join now, the purpose of this live stream is that we discuss the CLI architecture, not any CLI, the async API CLI tool that we're working on. Um, and so Subik is right now the guy who's mainly working on the CLI, and he's doing a great job. And actually migrating now from Ink to Oak Cliff, and that means that we need to reorganize things a little bit because yeah, um, it's not so much about Ink. It's because we were having the CLI as a React application, and then yeah, we were basing everything on the rendering process. The first thing that happened was the rendering process, and then everything was happening as effects on React, right? And that was a completely different architecture than you might expect to find on a CLI tool, right? Where usually you have the router for the commands, and then at some point you render some stuff on the CLI, or you don't, or whatever, right? I see my camera is doing some weird stuff. Let me just adjust it just in case. I think I made it even worse, but I hope it's fixed in a sec. So, um, so yeah, I was saying that we had this situation, and now so we want to come up with a proposal for rewriting the CLI, right? Subi, can you still see me?
Yeah. No, your video is not coming.
The video is not.
Yeah, still not working video.
Uh, this is damn. I hate USBs. I have like USB hubs for connecting the camera and like many peripherals, and yeah, they don't work well. These hubs don't work well usually. So I don't know what's happening, but let me just try. Because I disconnected my screen as well, so I cannot see you. Everything is broken now. Ah, okay. I get my screen back, I think. Live streams. These things only happen on live streams. Or you're near an airport, right?
Yeah.
I can hear them. Amazing. I used to live near an airport, near Barcelona airport, which is not something I really recommend. Okay, so I got my screen back, but now I need to get my camera back. Everything is. Ah, damn. Okay. I think it's no. The camera is like behaving really badly. So yeah, I don't recommend living near an airport. I mean, not an airport, near Barcelona airport. Everybody wants to travel to Barcelona for holidays or for
Yeah.
business or whatever, and then yeah, you can imagine the traffic of the Barcelona airport.
Yeah.
Damn. Can I get my camera working? Why? Too much. Why? No, it's gone. I don't know why. I wanted to fix it and now it's working worse. Typical. You try to fix it back and you introduce 100 more. It will be working. I see myself.
Hello.
Okay. Now I am back. Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and I see we have a guest. Luis Tame. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
We have a guest. So, can you introduce yourself?
Hello.
We have a guest. So,
Hey, can you hear me?
yeah, now we can hear you. Yes.
So yeah, my name is Luigi. I'm from Brazil. So I was studying using APIs and
Yeah,
came
now we can hear you.
across.
Yes.
So yeah, my name is Luigi.
Sorry, but we're hearing a lot of echo in the background, and it's confusing with your voice.
Is it good now?
I think so. Yeah.
So yeah, so I just discovered this project. So I would like to to see what is going on here and also
Okay.
contribute. And I'm really excited when I realized the project. So awesome.
Awesome. By the way, your name, so you joined us as Luitame, right?
Yeah.
And if I'm correct, if I remember correctly, that means fight me in Portuguese, right?
No, no,
No?
no, no,
No?
no.
Or how is it?
That's a
Luta,
very, very weird name because even in Portuguese it does not have a clear meaning, you know. So this is like a mix of the name of my father with some crazy idea from my mom.
how was so how did you say fight in Portuguese?
Fight is lutar, lutar.
Uh, I'm trying to find it because I mean I live near Portugal. Like I can go walk into Portugal, so I more or less speak Portuguese. And I remember I lived there in 1 year, and I remember like luta or luita is fight, or maybe I'm confusing this with Catalan.
No, you are right. You are right. Luta, luta. Yeah.
Luta, yeah, Luta, yeah, not Luita, Luta, yeah. Okay, that was my. I was like, Fight Me. Your name is Fight Me. That's amazing. That's an amazing name.
No
Yeah.
way.
Awesome. So welcome to the discussion. Huh? So I was saying before we had this false start that that we're going to discuss, the refactor, the new architecture of the CLI that Suvic has started working on. Um, so we've been discussing pros and cons of migrating to Oak Cliff, an existing CLI framework, and yeah, so Suvic told me like maybe it would be good if I get some, some guidance from you on the architecture. And I said like, let's do it live. Why not, right? Let's just do a live stream, right? So we don't do a private meeting or anything, and everybody can contribute, right? And also can everybody can benefit from the result of this meeting as well. So I there's something that I didn't do yet, and is Suvik. So I should let you introduce yourself because you didn't introduce yourself yet. So please.
So my full name is Shovik De, and I'm from India. Okay, so I'm basically from Kolkata, just like east of India. Okay, uh, and I'm like currently I'm in college in my final year, completing a CS degree, and I maintain CLI in a sync API. And recently, and as Fran said, we are transferring from Ink to we are migrating from Ink to Oak Cliff, and uh, that's what's going on. Nice to meet you all.
So, Adjus, I think you just joined. Maybe you want to introduce yourself as well. We all know you now by now, but but maybe you want to introduce yourself to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Hey everyone. Oh shit, let me turn on my camera. Hey everyone. So
Hey,
I'm Ayush, and I am a GSOC student. I got into async API through GSOC. So uh, now that's over, I'm just hanging around the community and trying to work on some issues. So yeah. Also, I had a question since you guys are talking about the CLI, um, and you're migrating it to Oak Cliff.
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, so I was thinking about working on integrating diff into the CLI. So should I wait for the Oakley migration, or do I start right now?
Integrating what? Sorry, integrating diff.
My
The diff tool.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
diff. Yeah, I would recommend that you wait, especially because you might end up working some code that is not useful at all in the end. So yeah, we don't want you to work twice.
Yeah,
Right?
sure. So I will probably wait
So
for it to integrate.
yeah, I don't think it should take a lot of time, to be honest. Like, Subic already got something like pretty advanced, and there is already. Let me grab the link uh, to the. Is there a draft pull request? I think, right?
Yeah, it's still in draft. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So I'm gonna share this on the chat. This is a private chat, not this chat. So current migration to Oak Cliff. There you go.
Nice.
So
Yeah. So
it is pretty advanced. I don't know. Someone is so maybe you are. It's because I hear myself all the time. I don't know. Maybe you have the
yeah,
speakers and the
sure. Yeah,
mic. Yeah.
yeah. Probably me. So I'm a mute myself.
Okay. So yeah, like I was saying, so this is migration to Oak Cliff. So Oak Cliff is a well-known in the area of CLI. It's a well-known framework from Heroku to build to easily build new CLIs, and yeah, so that is. We thought it's much better if we migrate to this well-tested, well-known framework instead of ourselves reinventing the wheel all the time, and then having to do things like preparing for Windows, preparing for Linux, for Mac, preparing for different types of um, terminals, which with different color support, and all these things that you don't want to be handling yourself, right? Plus, the routing, the usual routing, like if you type async API validate uh, and or is async API validate and the path to a file, you want to understand that this is validate, the command is validate, the path to a file is a flag or whatever you want to call it, and then you should be doing the routing. You get this for free on Oak Cliff, right? So you don't have to worry about this routing thingy. Plus, you get a plugin system on Oak Cliff, so you can customize mostly everything, right? So yeah, and yeah, so that's it. Let me before I had my screen shared on this Miro board. Yeah. Okay. I had this. You see my cursor on the Miro board moving?
Yeah.
I was moving it right now, and I have an iPad right here to write on the Miro board, and as I saw my arrow moving here, and I thought it was a fly, and I was like, "Shit, fly!" Sorry, I'm so stupid sometimes. So yeah, okay. Look, so Suvik, what
Yeah.
is, in your opinion? So forget about the current code that we have. What is, in your opinion, the easiest way to build a CLI tool? I mean, in abstract terms, so you don't have to go deeply into code. Like, how would you imagine if you had no idea, if you had no experience? Like, what would you expect?
Okay, so basically, you could say something like this, right? This is a program, this is a processor that runs, uh, and I communicate it through a set of commands and inputs, right? And according to the input, it performs something and gives me back, and it lives in my terminal. And, it's very primitive type of UI, and that's how it works. Okay, so in terms of async API, everything starts and ends with the usage of a specification file, right? Like validating to generate any code or documentation. Everything starts from specification file. Okay, so I guess most of our inputs will be async API specification files, right? So first thing that comes in the thing is like loading the spec file, either from my local system or through a URL or HTTP from somewhere other than my local system. So that's something we have a context concept. Like basically what we do is we alias the big file path by a small variable name that we could use multiple times. Like it saves time, right? Instead of typing in the whole path every time we run a command, we can just use the alias. Right? Currently we can only alias one file with a variable, but I believe like if you take diff for an example, so diff takes two async API file paths to perform, right? And also you have there's another one, uh, yeah,
So I'm adding
relation
here.
discover uh, relation discovery tool, right? So that takes multiple async API files to work on. So maybe in the future we'll have we need to update the context logic so that it can hold multiple files in an alias rather than a single file. So our first business is handling this thing, like how we input the file path, how we load the file in our system.
Mhm. Okay, so
Yeah.
so here you mentioned that the very first thing that you notice that we have on async API async API CLI is that async API CLI is that we always have an async API file as a reference in every command. We might pass it explicitly, like async API validate and the path of the file, or we might have it as part of the context, which is another command that we provide as a configuration, let's say. I think now it's going to be part of the config command, right? Like async API config context, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so right now you have like, we have like explicitly references or by context. And I would like to add one more, which is implicit. I will call it implicit now, which is, damn, I'm so bad. I don't type anymore, and I'm so bad at typing. Implicit, okay? So implicit, what I mean is when you do something like async API validate and you didn't set up any context, you don't pass a path or anything, we default to a set of names, default names. We try to find an async API YAML file, async API JSON file, async API.yml file, things like this, right? So we have like a kind of list of file names and extensions that we default to in case you don't pass it. So let's just call it implicit. So we always have like everything floats around or revolves around an async API file all the time. Like either it's explicitly context or implicit. Is it? That's my question. Like, is it going to be like this always with every command? Like for instance, now it came to my mind. Like for instance, if I want to create a new async API file, I might have something like async API new command, right? Async API new or async API create. And then I probably don't pass any path or anything, right? But so there's no async API file yet, but still, yeah, you're right. So probably even in this case, if I do something like async API new, that will be like the implicit case, right? Like I create a new file, and implicitly I will save it as async API.json or async API.yaml or whatever, right? Or yeah, so I will implicitly call it with a specific name in the current path. So yeah, so the async API file is still there, even when you're creating a new one, it's still there. It's just yeah, I would say that in the case of new, probably there's no, it doesn't make sense to have context. So context might not work here, but explicit works. So I can probably do something like async API create and the path of the file. So I want to create it in my personal directory / I don't know, my async API file dot async API, for instance. We use async API as an extension, which is not that bad idea. And yeah, so I guess so. Everything revolves around an async API file. That's cool. Something that comes to my mind with context is context only to store one single file, or is it used to store more information other than a file?
Yeah, so as of now, it is only storing one path of a file, right?
Yeah.
So after we add support for loading files over internet, it will also store URLs rather than files. Okay, and what I think in future we could do, so like as I told you, like diff, then relation discovery, these tools use multiple files, so it makes sense to have one alias that covers a lot multiple files, right? Other than it will be the same thing, I'm passing multiple context, I'm creating multiple context. That doesn't make sense because it needs to add. So that is something I guess we need to evolve context later, but for now it is only supporting one file, because right now we only have support for validate. That's why.
Okay, so I'm gonna just type here. Yeah, I'm typing on the computer instead of on the iPad. Shit. Where do I open the keyboard? Someone call a programmer, please. I don't know how to type in the iPad anymore. Anyway, okay, I found it. So I'll make it larger later. So we have this. Right now we have something like this, right? Or we're working on this.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm just gonna create a new one that doesn't exist yet, for the sake of inventing something new. Okay. So right now, we have like, this is the structure more or less. And so just so people know about it, because it might not be obvious. But the structure of the commands are, I think it's verb plus noun, right? Yes. So yeah, but the thing is that the noun might be optional. Then. I don't know how to type. Okay. Okay. Cool. So yeah, so that's why you see validate, which is the verb. The noun here doesn't make sense, or it could be defaulting to file, validate file, and then you pass or don't pass, depending on if it's explicit context based or implicit. You pass or not the path to the file. In the future, it might become async API validate document instead of file, or validate URL in case it's a URL. We don't know yet, but it's always verb known. Config, we made a trick there that Lucas suggested, that we use config. Config can be a noun and can also be a verb. So, so we made the trick there. It's like config, the context. So you can always read this as a sentence, right? Like async API, config the context. Async API, validate the file. Async API, new file, please. Right? So it can always be read like this, right? And I think it reads much better than reversing noun verb as other CLIs are doing. But yeah, we'll see. And yeah, so just wanted to note this for people watching the call. And yeah, so then, in your opinion, what is the first thing that we should do when someone types async API, the verb, and the noun once? And I'm talking about code now. Like, in your mind, what do you think it's the first thing that we should be doing?
Okay, so basically, first comes routing, right? Like which command to execute. So Oakleaf is doing that. It's like Oakleaf is supporting that out of the box. So that's something we don't have to code anymore. At first, we were coding that thing, the whole router thing we have to code, but now it's gone. And after that, we just check, like he has passed a file path, or he hasn't passed. He has passed a context, or he has passed nothing. Like basically, we check what his input is, because according to the input, we'll do different things. Right? If a file path is passed, we'll load the file. If a context is passed, then we check that if we have that context stored in our store. If not, then we throw an error that we don't have the context either created or check. And also, and if no path is passed, then we follow the 3 rule. Okay, so firstly, if no file is passed, first we check if there is any global context set, right? Because okay, I probably have to talk about this. When you create context, you can set one context as current context, right? So that's like global config type of thing, that it's after it's set, we will fall back to that context if nothing is passed, right? And if that's not set, then we look into the working directory. If we find any async api.yml, async api.yaml, or JSON, okay, async api.json. If we don't get these 3 files in the working directory, then we throw error that nothing is, like you need to specify a path, or at least something.
Yeah. Okay. But yeah, and I think in this case, so this is for, I will say, like, this is for reading files. When you have an existing file somewhere and you want to do something with this file. In the case of the new command, like async API new or async API create, we didn't decide how this is going to be called, but just an example. Then in this case, context doesn't make sense. We eliminate context, and we just have explicit and implicit. That's the only thing that we have. Like, you either explicitly tell us what's the name of the file and where to place it, or we will decide for you, right? Yeah. Okay. So routing is the first thing. Then once you have guessed the route, it means that you have to go and execute a specific function, I guess, right? Like a specific command handler, right? Like I want you to handle my validate command, my config context command, my new command, right? There are different handlers, right? So we can safely say, I guess, that once we have, I'm going to remove this. So once we have, I'm going slowly on purpose, so sorry if I'm going too slow. So once we have, there, this routing, right? Next thing we want to do is execute different handlers. Handler 1, H2, handler 3. Okay, so we have like different handlers. I'm going out of the screen. Sorry. And so there is always a dependency in each of these handlers, which is the file, right? Is the async API file. So this async API file is always a dependency of each of these handlers, not the routing. The routing doesn't matter here. So I'm gonna remove this and just gonna take this as a whole, maybe, well, not this. And I will say that there's a relationship here, right? So each handler might reference an async API file, either for reading or for writing, right? So, and also each handler so is it really referencing the async API file directly, or is it going through the context?
Yeah.
Always.
So if you see for now, if you see there's a validate command and config context command, right? So context commands should be able to change the context globally or like update the main.async API file, right? But validate command does not need to do that. It only needs to read from the context. It should not have the right capabilities, right? So for now, what I'm doing is like, so there's a function. Okay, so you pass in the input. The input could be a string, path string, or a context, or it could be undefined, like nothing. Yeah, because that handles the explicit, context, and implicit behavior, and that function intelligently finds out which async API file to load and returns a file.
Okay, so let's just then do something. I'm gonna remove this. I'm gonna add one more layer here. Resolver, whatever. Something that will either go through one of these beautiful arrows. I paint beautiful arrows. So each handler is going to use a resolver. Like this resolver is going to understand if it should be using the explicit method, context, or implicit, or 3 of them, or just 2 of them, depending, or none of them. So think about it. It just came to my mind. So there might be, oh no, so forget about it. Yeah, there might be some cases where you don't have to use an async API file at all, which is, for instance, removing a context.
Yeah, removing the context, you still need to access the, like, you need to access the main.async API file to perform any task that is related to context, right? So even if you're removing a context, we still we don't need a path, but we still need a connection to the
Yeah.
.snkp file. So
Okay.
that's yeah. So what I have created, say this is where the dependency injection comes in, right? So we have a context service, right, that lets us modify, create, change, and add new contexts to the store as well, right? So what this basically depends on a loader, like from where the file is loading. As of now, it has only one function and it loads from our system, the global.snkpa file. But as I remember, you opened a issue talking about making the context shareable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
That's yeah.
So I made it like in future, if we make decide on making it shareable, then we could use this context allocator to basically either load it from my system or load it from some other system.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what loads the .snkpa file and gives us the context object, which we use to determine which context to load.
Okay. So yeah, I guess yeah, even in the case of removing a context, you're always going to end up accessing a file, an SNKP file, even if it's for deleting it. Well, but no, tell me something like if I remove a context,
Yeah.
I will have to access the .async file, like you said,
Yeah.
but I will not have to access any async file.
No, no.
I will just, for instance, I will remove the .async file or some information in the .async file, but then there's no access to the async file because yeah, you just want to remove the context, but you don't want to remove the async file associated with this context. You don't want to do that. So we have an exception. We have an exception here.
Yeah.
And it's important to know that it's okay if there are exceptions. If it's just one exception, that's fine. We don't have to solve every abstraction, right? So to recap, we have the let me just point here. So we have the user typing some command, then some routing happens, depending on if it's depending on the verb, noun, flags, blah blah blah, and then this router is going to execute specific handlers, and each of these handlers are going to, for some reason, for whatever reason, whatever they have to do, they will have to execute a resolver that it's going to understand where the async API file is, right? So if I'm gonna validate, this is depending on what you typed. If I type async API validate, then I guess this is implicit unless there was a context set up before. In this case, I'll use a context. If I use async API validate in the path file and a path to a file, then it's explicit. But that's responsibility of this resolver, I will say, right? So this resolver will be in charge of deciding what to do, right? Where to look for the async API file. Cool. The only exception is removing the context. In this case, we want to find the .async API file, but we don't have to access any async API file, right? That's the only exception here. So I will say that if I would say that how can we make it? How can we differentiate this? Let me just No, that's not the way I thought. And anyway, I don't want to lose time with this meter board. So I would say that context itself, it's probably another dependency, right, of all these handlers. So it is a separate dependency. It is not like that we can treat this as a bucket. We cannot treat this whole thing as a whole thing, as a unique thing. We cannot do it because resolver explicit, resolver implicit, accessing the file, cool, that's fine. But when it's about context, I might want to access the context directly from the handler to do something else, like for instance, removing a context. If I want to remove a context, I don't need to access this resolver. I just want to go to the context model if you want. So now I don't know if you noticed, but I didn't mention model yet because I wanted to avoid any specific kind of architecture. I'm just trying to diagram the dependencies and the flows and everything. But let's say model or context handler, or call it whatever you want. And the context handler will take care of this, of removing the context, basically. This context model or handler, or call it whatever you want, or service or whatever, is the one that eventually, once we make the context shareable, will be responsible for looking on the current directory, or the parent directory, or the parent of the parent, or your personal directory in the end as the last one, right? So yeah, but that logic is not in the command handler. It's on the context handler, if you want, or context service.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I think we have something. We have so let me just let's just get a little bit deeper into what will it look like in code, right? So you said user and routing are user typing something, and then routing it's solved by Oak Cliff already. We don't have to do that.
Yeah.
They solved that. We don't have to care about it. We do have to care about these handlers, right?
Yeah.
Then that's the only thing that we will have to implement ourselves. We have to implement the logic of these handlers, right? Plus, we'll have, I don't know, say the resolver. I don't know how to call this. Async API file resolver. I don't know, or Async API document resolver. I don't know.
Actually,
is there a correct?
I gave a name called Spec File Loader
Okay,
to load
cool.
the spec file.
Cool. So let's just use what we have instead of inventing new terminology.
Yeah.
Okay. So spec file loader, you told me?
Yes, Spec File Loader.
Okay. Cool. So the spec file loader will need to check if it's explicit, context based, or implicit, or whatever, and then load the file or do. Now I have a concern here with the naming. So loader is cool when it comes to reading, like for instance validating. But if I want to create a new file, a new async API file, then loader seems like a weird name because I'm not gonna load it. I'm gonna save it, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna create it. So yeah, but that's naming, so that's fine. We can change it afterwards. And so as I was saying, like this thing. So let's say this thing about user and routing is solved by Oak Cliff. So we don't have to worry about it. We have Oak Cliff. Then we have to implement these things ourselves. This, and we have to implement this ourselves. This. Okay, but we said we just said that context might be another different thing. It is not something related to the async file only, right? So there might be a case where we want to, for instance, handler 2 might reference context. For instance, one of the examples is to delete a context. I just want to delete a context. I don't need to, or I want to rename the context. I don't need to access any async API file, just access the .async API file and change whatever I have to change. So yeah. Anything else? Do you think I'm missing here?
One more thing, we don't need async API file is for setting a current context, right? If you all we need is the name of the context that you want to set as current. We don't need any path.
So when you config the current context, you mean? Yeah. In this case, yeah. So we have delete, we have renaming the context and setting the current context. So usually working with context might not involve reading any async API file, right?
Yeah.
So we have people dropping from the call.
That's why I created a context service that basically handles all of these things. That doesn't depend on async API file, but takes async API file path as a input to perform all these things.
Well, let's not forget something that so here, let me highlight this in another color maybe. So this is context. It's the same thing. Those two are the same thing, right? Yeah. So here, here on this one, context don't have any dependency. So the handler directly calls context and that's it. But in this case, context has a dependency of an async API file, model, service, call it whatever you want, right? So I guess, sorry. So I guess that, yeah, context might have to reference the async API file eventually. In some cases, in most cases, I would say. So yeah. Anything else that you think that we're living should be straightforward, right? I think so. Okay. So now we have the generic overview, right? Let's get a little bit more into, let's narrow down a little bit more the process. So we get a little bit closer to code, right? Yeah. I was avoiding getting closer to code on purpose, right? So now let's get into step closer. What entities, and I'm saying entities, models, services, handlers, whatever you want to call it, do you think we have here? How many different entities can you spot here?
Okay. So firstly, there is context entity. It's like the store context store, like the data structure which stores all the context, name and path. Okay, that's one. I guess there's one more thing that context depends on is actually it's kind of like a allocator, right? Where to find the .async API file. For now, it's in the global path. Global path, like if you're in Mac, it will be user/.async API. If you're in Windows, that would be your username/.async API file, right? So that's allocator basically figures out, like finds that file over there and picks it up for accessing the context. Actually, I made it like this because if we in the future we might have to make that shareable. So at some point you want to have to load it from some other place, right? You might have a config file in your current directory, working directory, like jest has it, right? Dot config dot jest, right? We might have a dot async API dot config file. So in the future we could use that we can update the allocator to load the context file from different places, and nothing else had to be changed, only.
But do you think that this needs to be something separate from context entity? I mean, like,
yeah,
I
think it should. Yeah, I think it should, because
isn't it something that can be like part of the context entity? Like this logic can be there on the context entity. Like, why is it separately?
Just for the case of loading, right? For now, we load it from that default global path, but in the future we might need it to load it from the working directory, or load it from somewhere from the internet, like as you suggested in an issue. Yeah.
But this logic of loading this from your current working directory or another place or in your home directory or whatever, this logic can be on the context entity, right? Doesn't have to be extracted somewhere else, right?
Yeah, it could, but I did it like this because while testing, right, like we had an issue while we were testing, we were mutating or we were changing the .async API file when it was testing, right? Because in testing we need to add custom files or delete them. So my global file was changed every time I run a test, right?
Yeah.
So with doing this, I create a mock allocator that just basically doesn't pick up anything file from anywhere. I just return the context data structure, right, to the service. That service can later manipulate.
So I hear a first code smell here. Just you're adapting your code to make it pass your test, or to make it easier to pass your test.
Make it easier to test. Yeah.
Not to pass your test, but to make it easier for you to test it. I mean, it is a valid point. Some people like to do this. To me, it always has been like a smell. Like if you have to adapt to the testing framework, you have to adapt your code to the testing framework. It means that maybe you're working the other way around. Like I think, in my opinion, it's a bit testing framework adapting to your code or to your needs, right? So probably this whole logic could be on the test side, not on the this manipulation. Let's say could be on the test side, not on the code. Let's say on the application side. But I mean that's fine. Then the reason I was asking you, like, why separating this on a separate thing? You told me it's about testing. I wanted to avoid this when you told me like you want to separate this. I wanted to avoid this because when you land in the code and you land in the context entity, and I'm imagining it. I'm not saying the current. I don't know if it's currently done like this or not. I mean, you told me that it is like this, but like I'm imagining a code base with the context entity, and it's split in two, and this small logic is separated somewhere else. To me, it will look like a spaghetti code. You know, like I have to follow this, then another file, then another file, and I get lost. I don't know what I was looking at in the first place, right? So you know that you start looking. You go to a dependency. That in this dependency you go to another dependency. In this dependency to another dependency, and you end up lost basically. And from the context entity, it is not spaghetti code because it's just like one hop, right? One jump. And it's just one dependency. But if you're coming from the handler is using the context. The context is using, you know what I mean? Or if you're coming from the handler, spec file loader context async API file, you know, it becomes like a whole list of dependencies that it's super hard to track, right? So yeah. So my opinion here is that context should be a simple, super simple entity that it's clear. Like, for instance, if we know that we're gonna make the context shareable, then let's do it shareable straight away. Like, then let's not wait. Like, something we can do is we read the context from the current directory. If it's not there, we read on the parent. If it's not there, we read on the parent, and until we reach the the root, maybe until we reach the root. I was going to say that until we reach the personal home directory, but why stopping there, right? Like, we can we can someone might be willing to put this .async API file in the root. Okay, up to you, right? Then you can have a .async API file for all your users, all your machine users, which could be useful. I don't know. So yeah, why stopping there? We don't know. But this context class or entity or model or service, let's just call it entity, will just handle this. Like, I'll access the .async API file, whatever it is. I'll try to find it, and I'll manipulate it. I will manipulate it. I don't know. I will add some information, remove some information, edit the information, whatever. I'll just load it and pass it to whoever called me, right? I think, in my opinion, I think that would be easier. Then, if in the future we think this is a problem for whatever reason, like this logic there is super intricate and it is taking a lot of time to reason about this logic, then we can split. We can probably split or refactor. But let's and this goes for everyone who's watching here or will watch later. Like, I see a lot, and I've seen in my life, and I've done myself. I keep doing it myself sometimes. A lot of early optimizations, like very early optimizations. We as developers, we like to let's paint the perfect world. It's a resilient world. Like, the world can change in any way that my application will remain the same and it will be perfect. Yes, but what's the cost of it, right? What's the cost of doing this? The cost is usually that it is super hard to understand your code, right? When you do that, like, it is super hard to follow the code because you are considering things that might never happen, right? So, and that means you have to consider a lot of things, right? And I do it myself all the time. Like, for instance, with Glee, I started like this with Glee, and then I was like, no, from, no. Like, undo. And what the hell are you doing again? No. Build a simple sample, something that works, and then, oh, this is duplicated here, and in 20 more places. Okay, let's refactor, right? And let's start refactoring as we go. And then at some point, I saw the code, and it was like, I built a prototype, then I refactored, and that means that I started patching in many places, and the result was a super ugly code full of patches. And then I said, like, okay, now it's time to rethink the architecture. What we're doing here right now with the CLI, okay, we played with it, we gained some insights, with Glee, and I did the same. Like, okay, now I have a more or less clear vision of where this is going. What are we going to need? And now I can just sit down and say, okay, I have enough knowledge to start a new architecture. And what I did was precisely that. Like, okay, let's throw out everything that I just did, I mean, I didn't throw out everything, of course. And let's start something fresh with a new architecture in mind that will not make the code look patchy, right?
Yeah.
So, and that's what I did, right? And that's what we're doing here right now. So please, I mean, everyone watching here, and future Fran as well. This is a reminder for you as well, for me, in the future. Like if you find yourself doing early optimizations, stop it. Like stop, because usually what happens is that the cost of the complexity, it is much higher than the cost of eventually refactoring the code, and that's it. You refactor some parts of the code and done, right? So yeah, that's just wanted to say that. Like entities, I see context. You said you see context. What else do you see as entities? Like let's just go for the basic, maybe models, data models, if you want. Let's just go for data models.
Okay, so there's another data model that is being used every time, I guess, and will probably be used more, is specification file. It's like a class that takes a path as input, and it gives functions to check if the path file is correct, if the like the path is correct, and we can read the file or not, and we read the file and pipe the data wherever it is needed.
Okay, so I guess it's this async API file here that we have here,
File.
right?
Yeah.
I think, yeah. So you're looking at the code now, right?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be looking at the code. we're doing the whole thing from scratch now. Like forget about the code we have. Let's just stick to the diagram here. I said you were looking at the code, and I was like, no. So async API file is another one, right? So we have these two entities, and anything else that you see as a model, as a basic data model, let's say?
No.
Okay.
No. You too.
Well, I was going to mention maybe that basic command handler. So each of these, the base handler, if you want. So we can use inheritance here and inherit from a base handler. But yeah, Oakleaf already has that. So we don't have to worry about it ourselves. We don't have to create our own base class or anything. So these are the entities, like let's say the models. Then something that I see is this spec file loader. So this is to me this is another entity. And when I say entity, it doesn't mean it's a model. Now, is it really a different entity? Can't it be the async API file?
I don't know. Like, should the async API file also handle this?
Like for instance, the async API, I don't know. So you tell the async, you have an async API file entity, and you tell it, please, I don't know, please load the async API file, this async API file from this path, or load the async API file without any path, and then this is implicit, right? Or you don't pass any information, and then it will require the context, right, to perform this operation. So I'm asking because maybe we can simplify this a little bit. Like, so probably what we can do here is handler can just go directly to the async API file, imagine the code, and say for instance, validate. This handler here is validate. And we pass, I don't know, we call a function on the async API file entity. We call a function called, I don't know, obtain or get async API file. I don't know, whatever.
Or load,
right?
Yeah.
Or load or whatever, load. But you don't pass any path, so it's not explicit. And therefore, it can be either context-based or implicit. Then, in this case, the load will have to check the context and get the async API file from the context, get the path from the context, or either default to one of the default names. And by doing that, we remove this spec file loader, right? Like the async API, or we don't remove, we merge async API file and spec file loader, right? And we remove one more hop, one more hop.
Yeah. As of now, like if you look at the validation handler, right? So what is like, there's a validation service that is like that is encapsulating the async API parser that we like parser.js library, right? Where we pass the string or the JSON object, which parser basically parses and throws error if it finds any error, right? So the async API, so the validation service is taking async API file object as an input, and then it is using that thing to like do the whole process, right? So that's
but the
why I
parser
created
also accepts. I mean, the parser also accepts that you pass a string, a string or a JSON object, or so. And you say in the validation, because you're constantly going back to the existing code. Don't go to the existing code. Forget that it exists. So on the handler, this handler here, let's imagine this is validate, right? There is no validation service.
No.
There's no it doesn't exist. So it's a validation handler. It's a Oak Cliff command handler. It extends from the Oak Cliff command handler. And right there, it calls directly to the async API file and do whatever it has to do there. So we don't introduce one more hop, right? One more dependency in the middle. So the validation handler here, in my opinion, it might not be the best ever architecture, but it will be super easy to follow. That if you come to the code base, you find the validation command, and instantly you see some logic there that go grab the async API file. It calls directly the async API file here. Load the async API file, and then passes the async API file, either the path or the content or whatever, to the parser, to the async API parser, and that's the validation here. To me, this is straightforward. Like, most of the logic will be here, will be in the handlers. Most of the logic will happen here. Very little, not very little, repetitive logic that might happen in many handlers, like accessing the async API file, checking if it's on the context or not. Of course, we extract it, right? Because we don't want to repeat this logic in every handler, right? So yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, that would be better, I guess. It's like
not sure if better, but easier for sure.
Easier to understand, yeah.
Yeah, easier to read for sure.
Yeah.
Which at this stage, easier to me, easier at this stage means better, because we didn't even reach version 1 yet. So we still have to promote the CLI and see how people use it, what people ask for, what type of commands. We might end up, I don't know, watching this video in a year from now and saying like, look at these two guys. What a piece of what a piece. We can say it, this is not television. What a piece of shit they did here, right? And it's true. It might be true, right? That whatever we're doing here might not adapt perfectly and evolve perfectly forever. But in my opinion, we shouldn't be aiming for that. We should be aiming for adapting to what we know right now and what we can anticipate, right? Like what we can anticipate that it's going to happen for sure, not that what we can anticipate that it might happen, right? So like you said, for instance, we know that for sure we're going to make the context shareable. Cool. So this is something that we can anticipate it's going to happen. I mean, most probably, right? So yeah, so we can anticipate that. Cool. So we extract this logic into the context. Perfect. We don't have to deal with it. We don't have to be loading the context in each handler, right? That would be stupid, right? We extract it. So, and we call the context from each handler, or we call the context from the async API file entity or whatever, right? So yeah.
So most probably a async API file also has to be changed in the future, because we have to add support for loading file from over internet through HTTP. So that is
It
something.
will have to be augmented. I would say, like,
Yeah.
you load when you call load and you pass a path. You probably don't pass a path. You can pass a path. You can pass a URL. Don't know what else. Maybe those two in the middle for now. You either pass a file system path or a URL, and then the async API file load function will have to check if it's an URL or if it's a path, or we can be explicit on the handler and saying this is a URL, and so the async API file doesn't have to guess, right? I'm saying because we might end up having something like this. I'm in presentation mode, of course. Can I just type it? Yeah. So we might end up having something. For instance, so imagine we have something, I don't know, we can have, I mean, it's not the best name, but but yeah, we can, instead of validate, so validate could be defaulting to validate file, right? Or not, or we have validate in the case if someone just don't provide any second, the noun, URL or file, then we don't know if it's a URL or a file, and then we have to guess here on this handler, on this command handler, right, on the validate command handler. But if someone is actually telling us this is a URL, then we don't have to guess. We can just tell the async API file entity, hey, don't guess, this is a URL. So go fetch it, right? Go use fetch instead of using read from file or read file. So yeah.
Also, what if we check if the path starts from HTTP or HTTPS? Then we can
I'm saying that I mean, this is most probably the best option, what you said, right? So what you said is probably the best option, and we always guess if it starts from HTTP, HTTPS, then it's a URL. And I mean, not HTTPS, HTTPS : / otherwise, you might have a file called HTTPS something, and you're screwed. So yeah. Anyway, what I'm saying is that I'm just checking for all the, like, not all the possibilities, but I'm just trying to make it. Let me check. Okay. So I'm trying to. What I'm trying to say here is that we might not have to put this logic on the async API file always. We might want to have this logic on the handler. Depending on each handler, you might want to guess it, or you don't guess it. It's the user who's telling you, hey, no, this is a URL. Please go and fetch it, right? It can be something. Oh, this is something that came to my mind right now. So another thing that might work is someone, or something like this. Someone can just tell us / sorry, it is not big enough. Right? Can you see it now better?
Yeah, -- remote.
Yeah, -- remote, or -- URL, or whatever. And so when you pass, I don't know, and I'm using -- now because it's optional, it's a flag, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to. And in this case, if someone provides -- URL or something like that, then it's a way for the user to say, hey, don't try to guess. It is a URL. It is. I'm saying because in some cases, I know that there can be a potential collision here. Like, for instance, one potential collision here is if I do this, something like, I don't know, my context, then my context is the name of my context, or is it the path?
Yeah, that's the thing.
So I might want to do something like this, right? -- file, or even better to read it like this, like validate -- file my context, something like this. So my context in this case will be a file, not a context, right? My something, right? I don't want to spend time on the naming. So, I mean, it's clear that if we say my context is a context, but the machine is not, the code is not so smart, right? So validate my something. We don't know. We don't know if it's the name of a context or the name of a file. And that can also be a URL, maybe not a fully. No, not a URL, but probably not a URL, but it can be a host. So what if I want to just validate something that is on my local host? This is a URL. Not a URL, but it's a host. It's a host name.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, in this case, you'll have to do something like this and
HTTP.
Yeah, whatever. Anyway, and you don't pass the port because it's 80, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, something to consider. So I recall Lucas telling me like, hey, what's the probability that someone is going to do this and this thing is actually a file and not the name of the context? And I said, yeah, I mean, might be. I mean, like I said, don't call it my context. Let's just say something. Something is the name of my context, or is the name of a file that I have in my current working directory. We don't know, and we can always guess, or we can try to find the file called something, and if it's not there, then we understand it's a context. Or the other way around, we try to find the context called something, and if it's not there, we try to find the file.
Yeah.
We can always have fallbacks.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. It's like right now it supports context passing of name of a context and also file path. So first I check if it's not a file path, then it has to be a context. And if it's not context, then I show it's neither a file
Yeah.
path.
My concern with this approach, there's always a pitfall here. My concern with this approach is that you might create a context call something, and you don't have a file. Sorry. So imagine that you don't have a context called something, but you do have a file called something. Okay.
Yeah.
And you're validating this something file, and then tomorrow you create a context called something, right? And it's on your global folder, right?
Yeah.
Then you forgot about it, and then you go to this directory and say async API validate something, and suddenly it's not validating this something; it's validating something else, right? It's an unexpected behavior, right? Or the other way around. I mean, the other way around. Like if we reverse this, if something first tries to find the file and then the context, then we'll have the same problem. Like you might have a context called something, and you don't have a file called something, but someone from another team in your project creates a file called something, right? And then you go and say async API validate something, and it's going to validate the file, not your context. So yeah, like I mean, like I said before, these are things that may never happen. So our agreement in the issue was like, let's just see how people use it, and if it brings up problems, we'll try to find a solution. Because we might be solving something that is not the problem at all, right? We might be doing an early optimization here as well. So, so yeah, just wanted to raise that. So in short, what I wanted to say here is that maybe handlers can be passing a flag to the async API file entity saying, hey, no, don't try to guess, this is a file or this is a URL, or if this flag is not passed, then async API file will have to guess if it's a either file or a URL, right? So after this whole thing, I think we can now safely say that this is not needed. I mean, not as a different entity.
Yeah.
This is not needed either. Oh, I love this eraser. Perfect. So what happens is, oh, nice. Can I? Okay, perfect. So I can probably move it here. Yeah, these arrows are much better than mine. Okay, I cannot remove it for some reason. Okay. Cool. Well, I don't know what I did exactly, but yeah, something like that. So we end up with a very simple thing here, which is we might end up having to, I mean, this routing is done by Oak Cliff, so we might, from the handler itself, from the Oak Cliff handler, command handler, we just have to, we write all the logic there in the handler, and from there we call async API file entity, and async API file entity might have to, at some point, rely on the context, right? Which now we can, right now we can just get rid of this since it's there. So it is as simple as that. And we removed a lot of the complexity on the CLI, and all the logic is on the handler. Then the handler references SNKPI file. SNKPI file might reference context.
Text.
This other handler might not reference any SNKPI file, might only reference context directly, like removing the context, setting the current context, renaming the context, things like this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Perfect. For now.
For now, exactly. Good point. So yeah, perfect for what we need right now, right? And I
Yeah.
think, well, I don't know exactly how hard it will be to test these handlers. I think Oak Cliff provides a way to test the command handlers.
Yeah, so that's the issue right now. Okay, so I guess Oakleaf has support for Mocha. Okay,
Yeah.
but as we are using Jest, so I'm like trying to find out ways to connect Oakleaf test with Jest. Okay,
Yeah.
so I did something in the morning, but it did it's like the messages are working all right, but when we have error messages, right, like sometime we are to like we're throwing something and then we are showing a message on that error, that is not getting handled. Okay, so that is something we need to figure out first. So this PR will be over after that. The PR I'm
My
working on.
my perception on this is that well, I don't know exactly if there are many tests. I haven't looked if there are many tests or not. But if the tests are not a lot, I will start from scratch. I will not try to translate Jest to Mocha because it's going to be harder for you than actually writing them from scratch. I mean, from scratch. Sometimes you can just the body of the test you can probably copy and paste it and adapt it a little bit. But yeah,
But
I don't know.
there
This
are
is just my
there as
experience.
of yeah there is as of now only 10 tests. Okay, just for the context. And so
I
I
will get
think,
rid of this.
yeah, so we could switch to Mocha.
Yeah, I will
And
just switch to a fresh setup with
yeah,
Mocha. With all click tests, which I think it's related Mocha, as you said. So, but yeah, I will not lose time trying to translate them or something because I think well they both somehow operate in a similar way, but yeah, it might be slightly different, especially when it comes to stops and to mocks and things like this. So yeah, I'm more familiar with Mocha myself. I'm an old guy.
yeah, I'm opposite. I
Yeah,
never use Mocha.
yeah, I'm an old guy. So for me, Jest is pretty new. I know it's not new, but it got me already. Like I don't need Jest. I already have Mocha. Why should I be changing to Jest? And it got me in the situation where I was like, okay, I guess it's nice. I've used it myself. I've used Jest, but and I've done some tests with Jest, um, but yeah, like to me, it's like essentially the same. I think Jest is much faster and it's easier to augment with plugins and all the stuff. But yeah, it's just barely the same. So yeah, someone with a stronger knowledge on Jest and Mocha will be here listening to me right now and saying like, how can you say that? How can you say that? They're not the same. Jest is much better. Of course, it has to be better. I hope it's much. It appeared afterwards. I hope it appeared afterwards, and it won because it's much better, right? So Otherwise, we will be going back. That will not be good. So yeah. So man, any further thoughts about it?
No. Yeah. It's like, so I guess it is good we remove the dependency injection from our project uh, completely.
Yeah. So a note on this. So yeah. So people might not be aware of the current status of the project, but since it was a React application, it still is because we didn't migrate yet. It's a so the CLI is a React application, right? This itself, in first place, for some people, is like, why? It's like why you chose that, right? I mean, the whole application, not when you paint to the screen. The whole application is a React application, and then the routing and everything, like choosing if it's validate, if it's config, if it's new, if it's the verb and all this stuff. The routing, it's done using use effect, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
And it has to be done like this because you are in the React cycle, repainting cycle, right? And and because you are in this cycle, the painting cycle of React, you cannot just say, hey, just go and execute something and paint it here. No, you're already painting. You're doing this process while already painting, and you want something to change if something changes.
Yeah.
But that's weird because we don't want anything to change in the terminal if something changes. We just want to decide what we want to paint into the terminal, and we paint it, and that's it. We don't want this to be mutating like a progress bar or something, or a spinner or something. We don't want to do this. We just want to decide what to paint and paint it. So, um, so what happens in this case is that you are in a reversed. I don't know if reverse is a correct approach, correct word here, but you are somehow in a reversed approach. You are not calculating something and then printing it. You are calculating something while printing it, right? During the printing, right? So it's like, and then you have to do some weird stuff, and that's why sometimes it requires dependency injections, right? Because you are in a situation, or it makes more sense. You're in a situation where it's like, uh, it's basically it's a weird situation to be. It's a weird spot to be. To be honest, when I recommended Ink for the CLI, I was expecting that someone will come up with, not with Oakcliff because I didn't know Oakcliff at that time, but with Commander or something like that. So Commander also has the same functionality of routing commands, and that someone will just, from a command handler, they will use Ink to print, right? And that will be cool. I mean, that will be enough. Like, okay, you're printing with React. Okay, cool. But you're printing when you want to print. Instead, what I found was the whole application, the whole logic, from the user typing something to routing to going to the handlers and everything. It's inside the painting process of React, right? So it's like, and at first I wanted to contribute something, and I was like, wait, where is the render? What is the render function? Where are we calling render? And I was trying to find it, and I was like, okay, let me just search render, and I found it like in the index file, like in the very beginning, right? And I was like, wait, that's not what I thought. And that's why I triggered this issue in the first place. Like, hey, we probably have to move on from our current architecture, our current solution, and do something that is already tested with Oakleaf or something like that, right? But then I realized, like, maybe, and I said, like, we can use Oakleaf, and if we want, and we still can do it in one of these handlers, we can we can just use ink in one of these handlers. We can use ink and say, hey, so here's the React code that I want to render into a terminal. Go render it, and that's it. Well, you don't have to use any use effects or anything. Just render it, right? Or in case we want to do some animations in the screen in the terminal for some reason, I don't know, spinner or loader or something more elaborated. I mean, Oaklip has these spinners and progress bar and things like that. But in case we want to do something more elaborate, then we can use Oaklip. We can use ink, of course. So it's not about getting. It is not about getting rid of ink. It is more about how we use ink, right? How we're using ink currently, right? So yeah. Well, man. So, what do you think?
I think. So this is one question. Should the PR that I'm working right now, should I do these changes in this PR or open a new PR after this get merged?
As you wish. I mean, I don't mind, to be honest. Like, I mean, I can help you do this as well if you want. But one thing, before we do this, let's make a proposal first. So we don't get to decide, right? So I'm gonna paste this into a issue, right? Or I don't know, maybe on the draft PR that you already created. I'm gonna paste it there. And
it's better to have an issue. I think it's better to have an issue.
Okay, I'll put it. Okay, I'll put it on an issue, and then let's discuss there. I think it will simplify things, and we can discuss there because, yeah, otherwise it looks like you and I are here deciding how it will be, and yeah, fuck up the rest. No, I mean, we should take everyone else's opinion into account, right? So yeah. And if someone is watching, I see that we have two people watching. One on Twitch and one on YouTube. So before we leave, it would be great if you just say hi. We would love to know who's watching us. I think Kuda was watching us. I hope he's still there and not sleeping. Kuda, wake up. So yeah, and yeah, I'm super happy to do these things more often if you or anyone else need it, like discussing over a video call or live stream. That will be super cool. I mean, I'm super happy to do this more often. Luítame Oliveira. It was. I mean, thanks. I mean, he's saying. I mean, I'm gonna add the comment here so people can see it. Thanks for your good words. As we said, this is not a perfect architecture. It is simple for what we want now, right? In a year from now, we might be regretting. Who knows? Let's see. Let's find out. Right? Let's find out. So yeah. Yeah, and your name and your name is not Luta. Exactly. So Luta, for those who weren't watching before, Luta means fight in Portuguese. Yeah. And I thought it was Luita. But no, it's Luta. So yeah. So yeah. So cool, folks. Thanks everyone for joining and watching and participating in the beginning. And yeah, happy to do more of them. Thanks, Suvik. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm ending the broadcast, but stay there if you want, and we can have a chat afterwards. Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.